There, on page 67, there's some things that you can do, getting the church's history and structure and specific things. Some of that you'll get as much as you can. You're going to ask some questions of the committee that's working with you, whoever's working with you on that. So just a lot of those things that you have, but mainly you're going to ask a lot of questions. And you're probably going to also talk to the AMS. You may talk to somebody on the state staff, as well as talking to some of the people who are approaching you. But be able to get a clear picture of that particular church. All right, so the covenant relationship, Dan already mentioned that, and you'll see that on page 69 is the difference between a contract and a covenant. A covenant is a legally binding statement of agreement. A covenant is a faith-based statement of agreement. So if you'll go to the next page and see that sample covenant relationship between the church and the transitional pastor. At the very top, it says the covenant between a church and a transitional pastor focuses on what each party brings to the relationship more than what each party requires of the other party. Are you picking up on this? So what this is not, it is not just a job description. Again, we're trying to coach the congregation and ultimately the search committee. I found that I know I try to have all of the search committee on the transition team. And part of what I tell them is that this transition team is going to do much of the work, the background work, that a search committee has to do if there was ever any transition team. So it helps them, and they're involved, and so they're working through this process. But it coach them not to use just the word job description, but a covenant relationship. So look at the broad strokes. Right there, about a third of the way down, it says, led by the Spirit of God, the transitional pastor agrees to the following. You see that? That's to clarify the expectations of what you will offer to the church. And on the next page, what's the first line? Led by the Spirit of God, the church agrees to the following. If we can help churches begin to think this way, that it is a two-way street between the pastor and the church, and we both have a responsibility. Often all that typically churches have is a job description like the first page. Now, when we get tomorrow to stage 7, and we're talking about training the search committee, and the pastor search committee handbook that is available has this covenant relationship, except for the part about the transition process in that as the covenant relationship. So you're preparing them for that by the way you're working through this. So if you just skim down through here, you see that you're going to talk about the responsibilities of the transitional pastor. Seek the mind of Christ and the guidance of the Holy Spirit in all things. Be a person of integrity in his family, the church, and the community. Be loving and gracious to all. Be diligent in work according to a work schedule. You will share with them what kind of work schedule. I've known a number of pastors that have retired, and it's the geography works, and they have chosen to be full-time as transitional pastor. More often it's bivocational, but I've known several who've been very effective as full-time transitional pastors. Uses ministry gifts and knowledge and wisdom to glorify God, Christ through the church, provides spiritual leadership to the church. Form a transition team for working with the transitional process. So this is right up front. You're going to form that team. And then you introduce, right in your covenant relationship, the stages of transition. Now, the following things, obviously preach to instruct, inspire, enable the church through transition. Then several of the next items are going to be determined by what you have decided you will do. Dan has already alluded to this. Coordinate baptismal services. That would be a given to me, but as Dan has said, someone else may do the baptism. And maybe be a staff member. I've done that in church where there was staff members because I wanted them to have the long-term impact and relationship with this particular family member congregation. Officiate weddings. I have not participated in any wedding in any of the churches I've served. At funerals, I encourage most of them have somebody in their mass who is their pastor from some time in the past will do this. And I encourage that. I've been a part of a few funerals, but I've tried to not be the primary person. And then delegate responsibilities needed. That's what you would do. You can coordinate that, but just know that you need to, especially like weddings and funerals, be able to determine what it is you want to have a part of this. It's easier then to make exceptions to be able to have an occasional time you would do a wedding or a funeral than to have it there in expectation. Resolve conflict, lead the church staff. And again, when I talk about church staff, it's not big church. This last church, it was a bivocational pastor and 2 bivocational staff. But you are in charge of the staff, and that's stated right up front. Lead the church leadership team, church council, if you have that word. Counsel other church leaders and ministry teams in the work. Evangelize the lost, care for people with special needs, respect the ministry gifts of church members. Training the pastor search committee is important to be in this. When we get to that, the state convention here provides that kind of service, and so you may want to, we'll talk about that at that time. And then you'll see as a part of that right, written in your covenant relationship, be unavailable for a call to the office of pastor. It was interesting to me that in one church, like Dan said, that you have to be pretty much an absolute dud if there isn't some sweet person who says, well, why don't you be our pastor? And what was encouraging to me was members of the search committee, when people would approach them and say, why don't you just get Brother Henry? They were able to say, we love Pastor Henry as much as you do, but that is not Pastor Henry's ministry. His ministry is to help churches like ours during this time, and so we're looking for someone else, and so we will not change his ministry. Having the people begin to understand that well enough to where they can interpret for you, because it'll usually start with somebody going to the search committee. So being able to understand and clarify exactly what you're going to be providing. I've seen Dan's thing, and it is very, very similar to that. It just spells out, and you'll modify that as you need to. On the next page is led by the Spirit of God. The church agrees to the following: be loving and gracious to the transitional pastor and his family. Pray for spiritual power in his work. See how important it is as you're interpreting this to the congregation, and as they are then having that brought before them, and then respectfully relate to him. And you can read on down through this. Provide a salary and benefits commensurate with the duty of the office. Free him to do the work for which he is called, as other church leaders and members fulfill their responsibility. Follow the leadership in forming a transition team and conducting a church members workshop and the rest of the process. So being able to help that. One of the ways that when the church actually votes on calling you, I think they need to have a copy. The members have to have a copy of this to be able and be brought to their attention the responsibility we as a congregation are bringing to this relationship, and not just being able to just not having it clear for them. Work schedule. obviously, right up front, it's clear as to whether you are bivocational or full-time. Is this Dan's?
Yeah, you just asked me to have
I
that
think
in
we
front of me.
missed one back here.
Okay, I'm coming.
Yeah. He's included a few things about preparing to lead through the stages of transition. And I think, as I'm looking at this, he just spells out a little more about each of those stages. And so you can easily take this and integrate that in.
What I'll do is I'll send it electronically to Brian. He can
Okay.
send it out to them.
Good.
Hey,
Good.
You can feel free to
Mhm.
edit that or whatever, make it your own.
And here he points out in the work schedule about all preaching Sunday morning worships, meeting with various leaders during the Sunday school hour and Sunday evening meetings with the transitional team and other leaders as expected. In his case, Wednesday night church activities will not be a part of the transitional responsibility. That's something you'll need to decide. And one of the churches, my schedule was that church that was running 500. It was the furthest away. It was a 2.5 hour drive. And I would go on Saturday because we had 2 services on Sunday and Sunday night. And then I would stay over Monday. When we had transition teams, it would be on Sunday. And then I'd come back. Patty would usually come with me on Sunday. And then on Wednesday night, I would be there for prayer meeting, and I'd have staff meeting in the afternoon. And they rearranged that schedule. So you're going to work this out. And the church that was there in Nashville, we didn't have Sunday night service. We did have Wednesday night. And so I agreed to go ahead and lead that because I was trying to intentionally lead them toward a prayer meeting rather than just a third or another worship service, another Bible study. So then salary and benefits. One church did a really formal thing that they calculated the number of time segments, like 2 times on Sunday, and then they had it all. Somebody who really understood HR, I guess, figured this out, and they figured out the times that they were asking me to be there. They calculated as part of what that would be full-time, and then that's how they came up with the salary. So needing to be able to calculate what part of a full-time salary you would be as bivocational is you work that out with them. Do you have a formula at all for how, as bivocational, how they would?
I rely on the state convention folks to base, particularly in Kentucky and Alabama, same thing, to determine that I really don't get involved with that much.
Okay.
I usually ask the state guy to help recommend, and then he recommends to the church,
Mhm.
and then usually we're within, they're close to whatever.
Mhm.
I would base it on what I have done previously,
Mhm.
and then the amount of time
Right.
and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But state convention is very helpful.
And do you, also in there, there's the salary and benefits, and one of them is mileage allowance for mileage. If there's any distance involved, you can do the mileage allowance. One of the things I find that you can coach the congregation, you certainly would do this with the search committee, is when you get down to the salary and housing, to be able to coach people who have no idea that salary and housing, however they do that, is equivalent of typically people's salary. So the combined figure. And I do that to try to coach them not to use the term of the package. The package includes also, in most churches' minds, the benefits, the medical insurance and all of that. They need to understand that you can't expect this pastor, and especially smaller churches really need to understand this. They can't expect that pastor to be able to take his medical insurance out of the salary that's available. The church needs to make sure that they're covering.
I found that usually the state convention has somebody that does that, and even if they have even if it's a larger church, I always bring that guy in. Talk to them about the package. When they get down to getting ready to call a pastor, I say, look, they know, and like in Kentucky, the guy had been there forever, and it's revelational to them to hear somebody talk about the reasons. Who's here in Alabama?
That would be Brian.
Right. So here you go.
Yeah, and when we talk,
Call Brian.
and tomorrow, Brian and I will be, when we talk about that stage 7, we'll discuss this more.
Yeah.
But the point, even when you're talking to them at this stage, being able to help coach them on a few things is helpful, just to prepare the way for the whole congregation. Ken?
Yeah, there's, of course, people know more than I do about this, but there's W-2 versus a 1099.
That's right.
The 1099, you'll be able to get mileage to and from where you're going.
That's right.
So if you're going a distance, which often is the case, you may want to go with the 1099.
That's right.
So the W-2, then you're able to do the housing. So just a little bit of difference there for the transitional pastor.
Yeah.
And I just did my taxes, guys, so.
Yeah. So I would encourage you to talk with Brian and get those types of, get that kind of guidance when you're working with the church. So one of the things you're having the privilege of doing is to be able to help the church be prepared even for the search process and bringing in a pastor. Any way you can coach them during the process of bringing you on helps that next step, which was down to 7 and stage 8.
So, in the morning, we're going to talk about spiritual prep, and then we're going to talk about current reality. I'm going to talk to you in the morning about I got to talk in the mic because they're taping it. I'm going to talk to you about the listening sessions in the context of current reality, because it's part of you learning about the church. As you listen to people, you're going to learn some things. And I'm going to give you a list of questions that I ask, and then I don't say anything. I just ask the questions, and I take copious notes. I usually take my wife, because she's a lot better at taking notes than I am, and she's very discerning. But this piece that we're going to look at on page 75 is critical to, let's get to that. I'm not going to talk about conflict stuff. We already talked about all that, so we did that. Here we go. So I do this early, don't you, Henry? I mean, this is this Church Memories workshop.
You schedule it right up front.
Right up front. You tell them, right, this is one of the first things we're going to do. Okay? So viewing, stage 1, viewing the church through the eyes of Christ. There's 2 major parts of this. Okay? And don't skip this. Okay? Just, if you're not willing to do this, just don't do the transitional pastor piece, because this is critical to doing this. The first is a Bible study.